going inside the issues of our community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. Last week I was joined by four, what I said, of the 5 Democratic candidates for the congressional seat vacated by Rob Portman's appointment to the as trade representatives. In fact, though, there is a write-in candidate as well, so it should have been 4 of 6. But anyway, this morning and next week, we continue that coverage with some of the 11 declared candidates on the Republican primary ballot. Remember, the 2nd Congressional District sprawls across parts are all of 7 counties, ranging from the suburbs of Cincinnati to rural areas in Adams and Scioto counties. This morning I am joined by 2 candidates. Eric Minameyer is an attorney who lives in Loveland in Hamilton County. Mr. Minameyer is a retired Navy captain and a veteran of the Iraqi freedom effort. Jeff Morgan is a part-time rural postal carrier and a carpenter. Mr. Morgan grew up in West Union and now lives in Peoples in Adams County, so 2 different parts of the district. And welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Eric, let's start with you, because one of the issues that you would face if you were elected to Congress, you were a sailor, you were in the Navy. But if you go to Congress, it's a policy position now, not just being on the ground in a battle zone or something. What is your opinion, in a policy sense, about American policy in Iraq?
Well, first of all, let me say that I was not just a sailor. There were 178,000 sailors when I was in the Middle East at Central Command, and I was the 3rd senior officer of 178,000. I helped establish policy. I was the Inspector General. I was responsible for making sure that procedures and policies were followed, and I was responsible for deciding sometimes what those policies and procedures should be. So my experience in the military is actually the same kind of thing that we'll need to do in Congress. Okay. I was also responsible for stamping out fraud, waste, and abuse. Now, sometimes that dealt with people abusing cell phones, but I can tell you cell phones amount to a few $100s. I uncovered fraud, waste, and abuse in the billions of dollars, sir. So I'm familiar with that, and I am a watchdog of the taxpayers' money already.
What do you think, though, of American policy right now?
Right. America's policy right now, we are doing the right things. I support what we are doing right now. What we are doing right now is building up the police force and the Iraqi military. We can't use the Ba'athist. We can't use the old regime soldiers, so we have to train new ones. And we are doing the right thing, because the last 2 offenses in Baghdad were conducted by Iraqi soldiers, and they are doing that today. As we are sitting here speaking right now, they are fighting the insurgents themselves. And what I have said is that as soon as we get them trained up, we need to begin our withdrawal.
And how quickly do you think that can happen?
I think it's happening very, very rapidly, a lot more rapidly than I would have thought. There was a talk at headquarters of making the Iraqis go to a 3rd nation to be trained so they could do so without being bombed. You see, the bombings are police stations, recruiting stations, army posts, army leaders, if we could have gotten them out of the country, but it was decided to leave them there. And I think that was probably in the long term a good decision. If Iraqi is to be free, it will be because the Iraqis bring freedom to Iraq.
Jeff, what's your position on the Iraqi policy as part of our foreign policy?
Of course, we have to continue what we've started. I feel we cannot pull out early. We shouldn't just leave. The situation is not good right now. We have a lot of suicide bombings going on. However, I feel we've really got to give it our 100% support until we can get things completed that we've set out to do. We've got objectives. We cannot pull out. We need to support our troops. We need to stay there until we can get them in control of their own country.
What would you say about the issue of using our military, now that it's in Iraq, in relationship to Iran next door on the question of their development of nuclear use of nuclear weapons, possibly?
Well, we've got to monitor that situation closely. Our military always, needs to stand by as a ready reserve against that type of a threat. That is a threat not only, they're not building those just to keep them. They're building them to use. And that stands as a very real threat. Are you
open to using, in effect, Iraq as a base to attack Iran?
If necessary.
Okay. Eric?
The Iranians and the Iraqis have been historic enemies. We have already demonstrated our ability to fight a war from someplace other than Iraq. We don't have to be in Iraq to fight Iran. It would be helpful to have forces in Iraq. But with a friendly regime in Iraq, since they would be the targets because they're the historic enemies of the Iranians, they would be more than willing to not only let us use their land to attack in Iran if we wanted to do it, I think their soldiers would be right along with us. So I don't think that we need to occupy Iraq in order to have an ally in Iraq in fighting any country in the Middle East that develops weapons of mass destruction that would threaten Iraq.
Okay. A decade ago, when the Gingrich Revolution took place in 1994, one of the things that brought Republicans to power was the concern about the national debt and the annual deficits. Here we are a decade later with Republicans control the White House and both houses of Congress. The deficits keep rising, the debt keeps growing. What is your view of policy on fiscal policy and budget policy right now, and what would you push for if you were a member of Congress? Jeff?
The biggest thing I see is just fiscal responsibility and spending. We have candidates in the race who are saying it's always the liberals. Now that's easy to point to and it sounds good. However, as Republicans, we have passed many bills that are just, they're bloated. Quite honestly, they've got a lot of pork barrel spending in them.
Can you point to one? Can you point to something that you would actively have opposed?
No. There are across the board. We see programs that continue to grow. And the old thing about it was actually a reduction when actually it was just a cutback in growth. Sometimes when the spending is tight, when we're in this type of deficit situation, we need to make those cutbacks where we say we simply cannot afford growth for the next year. We're going to have to make do on what we've got. It's the same thing you do in a local budget. It's the same thing you do in a household. It can be done on a national basis.
Given the part of the district you're from, how do you feel about some agricultural subsidies, particularly around the area of tobacco and that sort of thing?
Well, some of those programs paid for themselves, the tobacco program in particular, and the tobacco program has changed with the tobacco buyout, so that's really not going to be an issue. There are subsidy programs out there which are going to continue. We need to keep the family farm in business. We need to take a close look at tax policy which supports corporate farms. That's not where government money needs to be spent.
Eric, how do you feel on these budget? Are there specific things that you would work for, and are you bothered by the budget situation?
Well, of course I'm bothered by the budget situation. I've been in elective office for 16 years. I've never had a budget in the 16 years that I've been responsible for the taxpayers' money where we had a growth that was above
Make it
inflation.
clear where you were in office.
All right. Well, I was a school board member for 6 years on a local school board in Great Oaks, which covers most of this district. And I am currently, and have been for 10 years, a Sims Township trustee. Now, we've had disasters happen to us, which we had to cover, but we make sure that there's a reserve fund. We plan ahead so that when we know we need a new fire engine, which costs millions of dollars, we spend so that we know we can do it. Now,
but local government by law cannot go into deficit, isn't that correct?
That is true, and I was just about to say that.
Okay.
But that's because there's a law that says that we have to do that. I believe that passage of the balanced budget amendment would require Congress to live within that same rule. And I think it's a good rule because it's a rule that you can live by and nobody can exceed. And constituents are constantly asking for more and more and more. And the constituency isn't always a person in need. Frequently it's some powerful lobbyist or broker who ends up giving hundreds of thousands of dollars or arranging for hundreds of thousands of dollars for people like Jeff and I who are trying to run for Congress, which I have not accepted any of that money. It would be.
Has anybody offered you hundreds of thousands of dollars?
No, but I would not. But I would not take it.
Okay.
And what I'm saying is that I won't be bought.
Okay.
And it's the buying of congressmen for favors that has led to this because they will pass programs that you and I have never heard of.
And won't hear of.
And won't ever hear of and won't ever benefit from. And then you add all of that up, that's why we're out of balance.
One of the programs that is front and center for President Bush is the changing of Social Security. There's a variety of elements to this proposal. In fact, it's not down in concrete very much. But personal accounts, private accounts is one part of that. Jeff, where do you stand on the proposals that President Bush has out there for changing Social Security?
One of the things I like to never forget about government spending and Social Security is that's our money. When they take it out of my paycheck and they put it in that fund, that was still my money, and you expect a percentage of that to come back to you. Traditionally, there's been a very low return on the Social Security investment. Private individuals can always do better than that, and still, without anything risky or throwing it in the stock market, simply CDs and bonds can do better than what Social Security has traditionally yielded. I believe in controlling your own money. I don't think the government has to take care of everything for me, and if they want to take, for instance, 4% of the Social Security money that comes into them and allow people to direct where that goes and still not have access to it, that's a lot of concern to a lot of people, is that people would waste the money if they had access to their own accounts. I do understand that.
Where are you on the question of reducing the benefits to people who were born after 1955?
I fall in that group. It doesn't sound good, but we don't need minor changes. We need an overhaul to make sure the system's viable. Because if we say, the system's going to go under in 2050, that may sound good to some people. It may be off the end of their radar screen, but my children and I am going to be affected by that. So we have got to make this serious.
So you accept that?
I accept that.
Okay. Eric, where are you on Social Security?
Well, first of all, let me explain that I was born in 1953,
okay,
just so people know where I'm coming from this. This has always been, since its inception, a pay-as-you-go system. There is no fund that marks Eric Minameyer. There's no fund that says Jeff Morgan. There's no fund Dan Hurley. This money that we pay in today is what pays the benefits for, at this time, my mother-in-law and my mother. Right. My father's dead and my father-in-law is dead. But this money that we pay in today is for that. If we privatize, and I don't disagree with what Jeff has said about the basic fundamental flaws in the system as far as people could do better in the stock market, maybe. But there's a lot of things that if we don't do it gradually is going to be very, very bad. And I think picking 1955 as a year is probably a mistake. Number one is, where's the money coming from? If the problem is that we don't have enough money coming in, taking more money out is not going to be solving the problem. It's only going to make it worse. Second, if you have this sudden influx of purchase of stock, you will inflate stock prices without increasing the national product. All you will do is increase stock prices artificially. The third thing is, there will be some people that make bad investments. Over 60 years or 50 years, I started paying in when I was 16 years old. Most people do that. By the time you're 70 years old, or whatever the retirement age is going to be by the time it comes up to there, they're going to have had a lot of things happen. Companies that were rock solid when I was a teenager are bankrupt and non-existent today. And then what we'll have is we will have elderly, indigent individuals. And this society will not turn its back on those people.
So bottom line?
Bottom line is, if we do privatization at all, it must be very, very gradual, starting with very, very young individuals.
So you're not wholehearted behind this. You see a lot of cautions that got to be put on this.
I would almost put it the other way, that I'm not wholeheartedly against it.
Okay.
Rather than not wholeheartedly for it.
I have to say, I did not say stock market as far as investments. There are other investments in CDs and bond funds out there.
That's right.
And then obviously a broad-based.
Well, I didn't mean to criticize what you said.
I'm aware of time. I want to move on to one other area. In recent elections, and including in this election, there's been a lot of talk about values. There's been a lot of talk about moral issues. And that certainly has been the case in general elections, but it's also the case in this primary race, in the Republican primary. And let's be blunt about it. There's a lot of discussion out there about whether Pat DeWine, who by many is seen as the front runner, at least at the beginning of this race, given the fact that he left his wife and his children, got a divorce, is he morally capable, deserving of being a congressman? Where are you on the general topic, but specifically how it relates to Pat DeWine? Jeff?
Well, the issue relating to Pat DeWine, he has to make individual decisions in his life, but I think that also reflects back when you say, I'm going to go up there and make strong moral decisions, and then you have a personal failure like that. I mean, it's not that he hasn't accepted responsibility and said, I did it, but it is a failure. It's a foundational thing. Family is foundational, and it's one of the bottom line issues in this campaign. If we're going to have federal marriage amendment passage, we look at who has a strong marriage. What's wrong here? Why don't we support these traditional values? And it's talking out of both sides of your mouth to say, I'm a proven conservative, and yet, oops, this is what happened, and I can't change it, and just to make excuses for yourself. Sometimes you've got to buck up and do the right thing.
So you would say that in your mind, from your perspective, and you speak very strongly about Christian values in your campaign, you would say that would disqualify Pat DeWine?
especially to speak on that issue and to claim that as a core part of his campaign, yes.
Okay, Eric?
Well, first of all, I think that personal situations are something that everybody could face. And I have no idea what went in his mind, and I certainly have no idea about how God sees what he did and whether or not he's made peace with his God on those issues, and I'm not going to get into that. But I have said this. He used the political influence that he gained by us electing him. Now, I didn't elect him to city council because I don't live there, but by the people of Cincinnati electing him to be a city councilman, and he turned around and used it to get a job for his girlfriend that he was cheating on his pregnant wife with. And I think that crossed a line, and I've said so repeatedly. Now, does that disqualify him from office? That's up to the voters of the 2nd District. Now, let me talk about moral values in general.
Very quickly, we're just about out of time.
I stand for all the moral values. I think that that most of the candidates in this race are obeying the 10 Commandments, and they're telling the truth in the elections. There are some that aren't. People need to look past what some of the rhetoric is and look at what people are really doing.
Okay. We've gone a little bit over time, but
Sorry.
that's okay. This has been a very good discussion. We're going to be watching this next couple of weeks and remind everybody to vote in June, on June 14th in this race if you live in the 2nd District. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dan.
Stay tuned. After the break, a proposal to redesign the symbol that defined the city of Cincinnati for a generation.
Baby, if you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air in Cincinnati.
The need for change is more than clear. The business case is frankly a relative no-brainer. It makes good sense. The plan calls for a modest city investment that triggers major private investment.
I like the fountain where it's at. I mean, I don't think additional expense of things like removing the wall or making the square lower or moving the fountain is necessarily, something they should spend the money on.
On Tuesday, Cincinnati Center City Development, 3CDC, presented its plan to City Council for a $42 million renovation of Fountain Square. The original square opened in 1871 with the Tyler Davidson fountain placed at the center of a long esplanade in the middle of Fifth Street. Driven by the need to construct an underground garage at the center of town, in October 1971, the redesigned square was dedicated. That design included making Fifth Street one way, creating a plaza, moving the fountain 56 feet, and rotating it to face Vine Street rather than Walnut, the news center of the city. To discuss some of the elements of the plan, I am joined this morning by Stephen Leeper, the president and CEO of 3CDC. Stephen, welcome back to Newsmakers.
Good morning.
Let's begin. I know there's a lot of specific elements of the plan that people have been talking about, but let's talk about the funding part of this. The number out there is $42 million. Where does that money come from, and how much of that's going to have to come from the city, from taxpayers?
Well, we're asking the city to contribute $4 million, and the balance of the $42 million comes from private interest. Essentially, the leaders of corporate Cincinnati and Civic Cincinnati are investing the $38 million, some of which is a good chunk of it's coming from Fifth Third. But
now, Fifth Third sits right on the square.
This is part of their campus.
Okay, so they're investing money directly. They're investing money in 3CDC, which will sell bonds. How does all that work?
They are providing a loan to this corporation that will take on the responsibility for redeveloping the square. But they are also making capital contributions in forms of grants to get the improvements done, and they recognize that this is going to benefit them. But not only is the city going to spend $4 million, which, by the way, they need to do under any circumstance. They have to invest in this garage eventually.
Because the garage, underground garages are deteriorating.
It's 40 years old. It needs a major renovation. They would spend $4 million, which would essentially be a Band-Aid. So they could either spend the $4 million and get this $42 million plus the $30 million that's going to be invested around it. So that 4 equals 72 in the long run.
Well, now, let's talk about that. All the attention, or most of the attention, has been focused on the square, which is kind of the top. It's the lid for for that garage. And in fact, the way I tried to set this up was that the way the square as we know it was created was really driven by the placement of that garage to begin with.
Correct.
To what extent is the deterioration of that garage really driving what's happening right now?
I think it's just that inevitably we need to renovate the garage. That should not be the driving force. The driving force is the fact that, Fountain Square has failed, both in terms of its commercial activity around it. It's either vacant space or underutilized space, and it's not populated most of the day. We did, as part of our presentation, sort of a day and a night in the life of Fountain Square, and during lunchtime, when probably that interview occurred, it looks like it's healthy. But, you go there between 8 or 10 in the morning, or 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 in the evening, there's nobody there.
Of the $42 million, how much of that's going to go to fixing the garage?
About 14.
About 14 of the 42.
Yeah, about 28 of it will go in the plaza itself, of which a very small, very, very small piece, 1% of the total cost of this is picking up the fountain. Now, we have to pick the fountain up under any circumstance. The fountain has to be picked up.
So any fix of the garage is going to involve picking the fountain.
I mean, the garage has got water going through it, and some of the water is actually coming from the fountain. Some of it's coming from a deteriorated Fifth Street. But we got to put a new lid on the roof.
Okay. Moving the fountain has become a sort of centerpiece for the discussion that's going on right now. Jeff Hirsch helped us visualize this the other day. Let's take a look at this.
Say they want to move the fountain 110 feet to the north. Let me help you visualize that. I'm the fountain. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Moving the fountain is supposed to allow better use of the square for eating, playing, and gathering.
107, 108, 109, 110. Well, that's pretty close.
Okay. Only Jeff can do stuff like that.
Thank God the fountain doesn't look like Jeff.
Thank God. And you said it, not me. Okay. If you're going to repair the garage, you have to pick up the fountain no matter what.
That's correct.
But then why move it? And here we got a graphic on screen. Why move it 110 feet to the north once you've done that? What's the justification for that?
Well, there's two issues there. One is that if we are to lower the square on Fifth Street and add a sidewalk there, which we want to make it more pedestrian friendly, because it isn't very pedestrian friendly as you cross from the Weston, you're going to have to push it out of the right-of-way, because it would literally be about 5 feet from the sidewalk. And lowering it, it would be almost at the direct level of the traffic, which from a gathering around standpoint is no good, and it's no good for the fountain itself, which would possibly be in harm's way as a result of passing traffic and elements from the weather and so forth.
So you're going to move the fountain, plus you're going to lower it so there's no longer the barrier there to get on. And we have a graphic, if we could pull the one up that shows it from the corner of Fifth Street, what the final thing is going to look like. They'll put that up.
Yeah.
So that's really important in your mind too, making it easier to get on and off the square.
To get in and out of the square, and then by placing the fountain in the location that we're recommending, we think it makes a spectacular element for the dining and people being able to enjoy it around there. And you'll be able to. We're proposing and have great interest in providing outdoor restaurants all around the square. So having the lady that close to the outdoor diners, we think is a positive thing.
Let's go, I'm just helping people upstairs know what I want to put up. Let's put up B11 for a moment, please. You're talking about retail and the need to fix retail. What's the problem with the space around the square at the moment with the restaurant space?
Well, there's only one real restaurant on the square itself. That's Rock Bottom. It is. It's the elements and the structural structures around it that cause the problems. I mean, the skywalk, although it does allow people to move freely in a conditioned space, it poses less than a desirable element around the dining.
And what would it? This is what you propose.
Yeah, it opens it up. It allows people to have controlled space where they can have outdoor dining, and then it allows people to dine freely outside of the skywalk area. So I think it'll be like night and day when you see when the skywalk is down, when the stage is down, when the barriers are down. Fountain Square, although we're not expanding the size of it, it'll look like it's significantly bigger under the new proposal.
Okay. I want to make sure everybody knows that tomorrow, on Monday, there is a public hearing at City Council, in Council Chambers at 5 o'clock. And everybody's welcome there. And if you want to know about this plan, go to 3cdc.org, click the Fountain Square section, and then click on Presentation. And make yourself knowledgeable about this, because there's a million other questions.
Good.
Stephen, thank you. And this
Dan,
discussion will
thanks for
continue.
having us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for making Local 12 Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Next week, the 4 frontrunners for the 2nd Congressional seat. Have a good week.